This is the Bat Flip Podcast. Now here's your host, Damien, David, and Matt.
Hey, everybody, and welcome into another edition of our season previews on the Bat Flip Podcast. I'm Matt here today. I'm joined by Damien, and today we are going to talk about the Cleveland Guardians. The Guardians in 2024 were the runners-up in the American League. They lost to the Yankees in the ALCS, which was a 5-game series, but it was very competitive. There were multiple competitive games in there, so they were very close to going to the World Series last year, and this is a franchise that is money strapped. They don't spend a lot of money, but they've been able to figure it out year after year. It doesn't really seem to matter that much unless they have a year where they just have massive injuries like they did a couple years ago. And it's going to be an interesting team this year. Damien, what are your overall thoughts on the Guardians?
You just never doubt them. It doesn't matter what their roster looks like at the end of the day. Just don't doubt them because they are one of the best pitching developing teams there is. They find a way to get the most out of whatever pitchers they have, even if the names don't really jump off the page to you. And even their batting does kind of the same thing. There's some guys that you really kind of feel underwhelmed with, and I think for a long time it was just like the Jose Ramirez show for the most part. And we've had Stephen Kwan creep up recently, but a lot of the other names you just are like, I just don't believe in them, but they still find a way. So that's what I think. Cleveland, just you can never doubt them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned that they don't spend a lot of money, but I guess we can start off by talking about their off season, and that was kind of the theme of this off season. Just not a lot of big moves. Some interesting moves. They typically do pretty well around the margins. They brought in John Means as a free agent. That's very interesting. He's been injury plagued, but at times has been a really good pitcher in Baltimore. So we'll see if he's able to figure it out here in Cleveland and stay healthy. Jacob Junis is kind of an interesting name. He had been with the Brewers. He's a guy that's done a little bit of starting, a little bit of relieving. Has had some mixed results there. Paul Sewald is really interesting. He had a really down year last year with the Diamondbacks, but he has been at times a very, very successful reliever. So we'll see if they're able to find it back with him. That's one thing this team has done so well in recent years is developing relievers and finding relievers off the scrap heap that do really well. Carlos Santana was brought in. They traded Josh Naylor. We'll talk about him in a minute. But they traded him in the offseason, so they replaced him at first base with Carlos Santana, who is still a pretty good player. He's gonna play for. He's gonna get on base a lot. The average is just not gonna be there, but he gets on base and he'll still slug a little bit. So definitely an interesting guy there. Slade Ciccone they brought in that Naylor trade. Interesting arm. Has some level of good stuff. We'll see if he's able to put it together in Cleveland, and Luis L. Ortiz as well. They brought him in a trade. He's just kind of a depth arm. He'll be there, probably their fourth starter. So, came in from Pittsburgh. So, definitely an interesting list of additions here. And I guess, do any of these stand out to you, Damien? Because I just don't. I don't think that they really added that much to help out, and it's kind of disappointing after being in the ALCS last year.
Yeah, I think one thing that we also need to mention is we didn't put it on the additions page, but they did re-sign Shane Bieber.
Very true.
He
Yep.
was a free agent. They did re-sign him. He is expected back, I think, in May, like late April, May, somewhere right around there. Which we know when Shane Bieber's on, he's one of the best pitchers in
Yeah.
baseball, anyways. So I think the Guardians did some interesting moves this offseason. Carlos Santana, I think, as a defensive first baseman, a real good clubhouse guy that kind of fits there for them. They have Kyle Manzardo, which we'll talk about here in a little bit too, at first base. And Naylor was on a 1-year deal. They weren't really going to keep him. So I think it kind of made a little bit of sense to get something there. And I really like Slade Ciccone that they got in that trade. We've already seen Cleveland mess with his pitch grips and pitch shapes a little bit already. He's someone who has really, really good talent. He's just never able to find it in the Arizona system. So I'm really excited to see him get with one of these pitching lab teams and see if he could figure it out. Because there was talk that when he was a prospect that he could be a number 2 one day. Don't know if he'll reach that height, but I think you get a really good, solid rotation arm. And Luis Ortiz is a little bit underrated because he's been in Pittsburgh. And they haven't been good teams, and then they ended up having Mitch Keller and Paul Skeens, and then Jared Jones right there. So he kind of flew under the radar, but he's a good middle to back end of the rotation arm as well. And again, going to another pitching lab team here in Cleveland, I wouldn't be surprised to see his stuff tick up a little bit as well. So I think that they did some good things around the margins to kind of help, which is what this team always kind of does.
Yeah, for sure. I want to add on Carlos Santana. You mentioned the defense at first base. He was actually a positive value defender last year
Yeah.
at first base, which is really unusual. And at 38 years old, that's pretty impressive. And he put up 3 WAR last year. It's pretty good at the plate as well. So
Yeah.
we'll see if he's able to repeat that. And he put up more value than Josh Naylor last year. So I guess we'll look at the subtractions now here. James Karinchak, they outrighted him. I felt like it was worth putting him on here because at one time he was a very good reliever. He
Yeah.
was kind of a sticky stuff merchant, I think. So dealt with some injuries as well. Alex Cobb, he was here last year. Veteran pitcher that has had varying levels of success. Matthew Boyd was good for the Guardians late last year. Pitched well in the playoffs. He moved on to the Cubs. Josh Naylor, they traded to Arizona. Andres Jimenez, this is a big one that they traded to. They traded to Toronto, which is really, really weird for me. They acquired Spencer Horwitz for him, and he's the one that they flipped for Luis Ortiz, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yep.
So that was definitely a weird move there. Andres Jimenez was signed long term and had been very, very good at times. And even when he wasn't very, very good, he was still a solid because his defense gives him a really high floor. So I think that's a big loss for them. Nick Sandlin, they traded. They traded Peter Strzelecki, and
Strzelecki.
yeah, I have no idea how to say that. And also Eli Morgan.
Yep.
So lot of long list of losses here for this team. I guess Damian. I think the biggest one for me is probably Andres Jimenez. But out of him and Josh Naylor, which one do you think hurts worse here? Because this is a team that is strapped for offense, and you losing 2 of your better position players is probably not on your radar for like how to improve your team, right?
Yeah, I think in the grand scheme you could kind of say that. But like I mentioned earlier, with getting Carlos Santana for trading Josh Naylor away, who's someone you knew you weren't going to sign long term, and with Manzardo already there in the wings, like I don't think the Naylor move
Yeah.
really hurts them much. Honestly, Santana and Naylor, they're really close offensively in the first place, and then you added better defense there. The Jimenez one was the kind of more interesting one, but at times he's been really bad offensively as well. And they kind of wanted to open up first off a room for some of their younger guys to try and play in the Brian Rocchio and Gabriel Arias, and I think they even have another middle. Tyler Freeman is another guy who's got some second base run for them as well. I think they wanted to open up some more room for that, and then also the money that they were paying Jimenez, they basically got off of the full amount of that money. They didn't have to eat anything from it, which if Cleveland always strapped for cash, that could be another thing. And if you're talking about more of a good defensive second baseman that's going to give you a little under league average hitting, I think paying that money that they were paying probably to them wasn't a smart investment moving forward. So I get that it kind of hurts there, but I understand why a team like Cleveland kind of does this in the grand scheme of everything.
Yeah, I'm with you. So we'll see how it all works out. I'm a little uneasy on their their moves
Yeah.
here this offseason, but we'll see.
Yep.
So I guess we'll move on and talk about the position players that will be there this year. So I think you kind of have to start off by saying, in left field, you got Stephen Kwan, who is a very, very good player. I mean, he really has been. He has shown that his first year was not a fluke. He's put up 12 WAR in 3 seasons for them. Doesn't strike out at all, basically. Walks at a pretty high rate. Last year, he hit 14 home runs, which was more than his career total before last year. Put up a 131 WRC plus. Very good year. He's projected for 4 WAR this year. Very solid left fielder. Lane Thomas, they brought into the deadline last year. Really solid in center. Maybe not the best defender out there, but he's definitely talented. It's probably the best outfield they've had in a while just because of those 2 guys.
Yeah.
Will Brennan and Wright. Um, we'll see there. That doesn't really give you too much. That doesn't give you all that much. Confidence. But they also have Junquinski and Noel on the bench that can play some right field as well. We talked about Carlos Santana at first. Juan Brito or Gabriel Arias at second base. Not
Yeah.
sure which one of those guys is going to end up winning that job. Brian Rocchio, really solid defensively at shortstop. Josh Naylor behind the plate. Bo Naylor behind the plate, which is funny because they traded his brother and he's
Yeah.
still there. So Bo Naylor behind the plate will be interesting. Kyle Manzardo right now at the DH spot. You know, we'll see how Carlos Santana performs. I could see a world where he moves to DH once David Fry comes back, who is on the IL, and then. But I guess the kind of the key player here. I mean, as it has been for how long now? I mean, Jose Ramirez. I mean, what he has done in his career is remarkable. I mean, just such a consistent player, and does everything well. Even though he just doesn't look like the type of guy that would do everything well, and he's only 32 years old, which is kind of hard to believe. So you know, Jose Ramirez this year, he's getting close to Hall of Fame like caliber career, and it's pretty wild to believe. But Damien, you know, out of these guys, I think we kind of know what we got in Ramirez, right? He's going to be a very good player. He hasn't
Yeah.
really shown signs of decline at all. 3 of the last 4 years put up 6 WAR. Quan has been very consistent. He's really young. We expect him to be good as long as he's healthy. Thomas, I think we kind of know what we get out of him. Do you think that Rocchio, Brito, or Manzardo, out of those three guys who are former top prospects, who are up here in the big leagues now, and I guess you can throw in Arias as well in that. Which one of those guys, those four guys, or three guys, do you think is going to be the potential like breakout here?
Yeah, I want to say like Manzardo is the guy that I kind of have a little bit more hope for to break out offensively. But he's struggled at times. You know, he had a 98 WRC plus in the majors last year. Um, Rocchio is obviously going to get the longest leash because he's a very good defensive shortstop, but his offensive numbers are kind of a little bit down as well. So if I had to pick one, I would say it's going to be Manzardo. But again, he's probably going to be limited to a platoon role. You know, with probably Noel and then Fry when he comes back eventually. So that if I had to pick a breakout from the offense out of those guys, I'd probably say Manzardo's my best bet.
Yeah, I think I might actually go with Rocchio,
Okay.
because I'm a sucker for players that have good plate discipline numbers, and Rocchio had a 10% walk rate last year as a rookie. I'm just kind of a sucker for that, and also his big issue last year was probably just impacting the ball and the quality of contact. And you know, he wasn't really thought of as a guy that just had no pop in his bat coming in. So I think there's probably some room for improvement there. And obviously, as you mentioned, really good defensive shortstop. So
Yeah.
anytime you got that, you've got some form of a floor too. But you know, looking at the bench, Austin Hedges is going to be the backup catcher again, so that's interesting. You know, we talked about Noel, the hero from the ALCS game last year, Big Christmas, Gabriel Arias, and then Rodriguez there as well. And then you know, some prospects to know. I think Travis Bazana is definitely the prospect to know here. He is possibly an answer at second base later in the season. We'll see how quickly he moves, and then also Chase DeLauder. I think he got hurt today or yesterday,
He
but possibly.
Yeah, he got hurt recently. I think it was a core strain or something. So I think
Yeah,
he's out like 6 weeks.
yeah.
Um, so
So, but that's a guy who has a lot of talent. He's a pretty high level prospect, top 55 prospect right now in MLB. So, that's definitely somebody to look out for as you know, a potential you know, as a potential outfield option, since you know they kind of got a void in right field right now out there. So
yeah,
definitely something to look out for. This farm system is very good. I believe they have 6 or 7 top 100 prospects on Fangraphs right now. So definitely some more you know, some more pieces to come here. But moving on, we will look at the pitching here. And this is where this team always ends up being better than we think they're going to be.
yeah,
I mean, that's really just the only way you could say it, because this pitching staff, especially in the rotation, just off the off the eye test here, is just not very good. Tanner Bybee is pretty good. He's had a good start to his career. Definitely somebody who you trust to be a solid arm and be consistent in the rotation. But their number two is listed as Ben Lively. I mean, for a team that's supposed to be a contender in the American League this year, I mean, just based off the fact they were last year, I mean, Ben Lively being your number two feels really weak. Um, Gavin Williams is in there as their number three. That's a very high upside arm. Then Luis L. Ortiz is in there. We talked about him a little bit earlier, and Tristan McKenzie is still there. Who knows what he's going to be? He's had a good season before, but nobody really knows if he's going to ever get back to that level. He's dealt with a lot of injuries as well. So, um, and then obviously, we mentioned John Means earlier, mentioned Shane Bieber earlier. Those guys will probably both be back. Bieber will be back around the end of April, beginning of May. Means will be longer than that, but he will probably pitch sometime this year if this team is competitive. So, Damian, out of Lively and Ortiz and McKenzie, which one of these guys do you think steps up? I think I know the answer to that, but if it's not Ortiz, which are the other ones do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's Tristan McKenzie. He's one that I do, I've had some high praise for before. I think he battled some injuries and some other weird mechanical stuff last year that I think given an off season he could definitely work his way back from. So I trust McKenzie a little bit more than Lively to be a solid pitcher. I know Lively was last year, a 4 ERA ish guy. But I think McKenzie, if he jumps up to what he can be and gets into that kind of top three there with Bybee, Williams, and McKenzie, somewhere in that order, um, I think the Guardians will be just fine. Obviously, with Bieber coming back and you're dealing with Lively and Ortiz kind of as your back end of your rotation, I think it could be really good.
Yeah,
If Williams and McKenzie are kind of battling for your 3-4 spot.
yeah, you definitely feel really pretty. I feel pretty good about this rotation. If you get Bieber back and you get Means back in the second half, if they're
I
actually
honestly
back to normal,
I don't
healthy,
think Means is coming back this year.
he
This
might
was
not. I mean,
this is his second Tommy John
yeah, it's the
surgery, and
second one.
his first one was kind of delayed longer than it should have been anyways. I think
Yeah,
his first one went like 18 months, which is usually the like short side of the second time.
right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if he misses all of this year.
Right, right. Well, I guess we'll it's wait and see, but especially Bieber. I mean, that's the guy that Means is kind of similar to Ortiz and
Yeah,
Lively and these guys where it's not, but Bieber's the guy. I mean, if you get him back, that makes you feel a lot better about this group. So,
absolutely.
looking at the bullpen here, obviously you've got the best closer in baseball, perhaps, in Emmanuel Clase. Obviously Cade Smith had a great year last year. He looks to be a really good reliever as well. Probably could be a closer of most teams. Hunter Gaddis is interesting. He had an incredible year last year. His projection this year is not very good, so that's kind of interesting. But I definitely would look out for that one to be good again. Paul Sewald, we talked a little bit about. We'll see if he can have a bounce back here in this new system. Tim Herron's kind of interesting. He's a lefty. He's got good projections this year. Um, Andrew Walters, Doug Nikhazy, and Jacob Junis, who we mentioned earlier, are going to round out this bullpen. And it's probably worth mentioning too that Trevor Steffen
Yeah,
had elbow surgery last March, so he'll be back at some point, I would assume. And he's been pretty good for them in the past as well. So we'll see if he comes back. And that's a pretty solid group. If for me, it's one of the better bullpens we've seen, especially if Hunter Gaddis is able to kind of repeat his last year, and the projections are underestimating him a little bit. That makes you feel really good about this pin. So, Damien, any names stand out other than Clase, Smith, and Gaddis to you?
no, I mean, I see will obviously be in there as a late inning guy or former late inning guy that's kind of getting pushed the middle relief. I think that can be really well. And Tim Herron, I mean, you highlighted him, but he is a really kind of up and coming under the radar, left-handed reliever. Last year he had a 192 ERA and a 286 FIP. The expected ERA was 324 and the xFIP is 364, but he has some nasty stuff. His strikeout rate actually went down a little bit last year and he got better. And his walk rate was, the lowest it's been, which is 3.4 per nine. So he could still work on that a little bit, but he's got some nasty stuff. And he really has to step up this year too because they lost Sam Hentges. I always butcher his last name.
Yeah, Hedges.
Henches, yeah. They lost him to shoulder surgery late last season, so Heron's really gonna have to step up to kind of be the main lefty because he was the secondary-ish option um, last year. So I'm excited to see what Heron can develop into as like a top left-handed option this year.
Right, right. Well, yeah. Just to mention a couple prospects too. We talked about Chichoni a good bit earlier. I actually think he might factor into the bullpen here.
Could very well could.
So I think I wanted to mention Paulo Espino.
Daniel
Or sorry,
Espino.
Daniel Espino. Paulo Espino. Man, that's a name.
Yeah,
Daniel Espino. Um, he was once thought of as maybe the best pitching prospect in baseball, and then the injuries just destroyed him for like 3 or 4 years in a row. His fastball velocity was well over 100, um, and he hasn't pitched it since 2022.
yeah.
And it's been, and he only pitched 18 innings that year. So it's almost not worth putting him on there. But you feel like if he ever does get healthy, like if that stuff is still there, I think that's like a
Yeah.
Mason Miller type because you're probably not going to start him anymore because of the injuries. But if the stuff is still there, if he ever pitches again, then I mean, you might have a Mason Miller type here. So
Mm.
I thought it was worth putting on there. And then also Messick's a pretty good prospect as well. So definitely a solid group here. We'll see what happens with some of these starters and if someone's able to step up and kind of add some depth to that rotation. But um, you know, I feel like this is probably not going to totally hold this team back, if anything else. But I guess we'll move on and talk.
Here, one
Yeah, yeah.
one
Go
more
ahead.
name. I want to mention Joey Cantillo. He's another guy who reached the majors last year, and in 38 innings, he had a 4.89 ERA. But if you look at the expected numbers, an expected 3.83 ERA, his FIP was 4.07, but a 3.46 xFIP. Um, I know he's kind of struggled in the spring training so far in his 3 innings, but he's a guy who has really good stuff. And a lot of people are putting him as like a watch out candidate that's really flying under the radar. So I just want to mention his name, Joey Cantillo. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy we're looking back, in a year from now and saying like, hey, here was one of the Guardians guys who kind of broke out that nobody was talking about. I think Joey Cantillo could be one of those guys.
Yeah, he has a pretty good projection from Fangraphs as well. So
Yeah.
definitely good call there. But yeah, moving on, we'll talk about the overall outlook here for this team. So the over under win total for the Guardians is 82 and a half. So last year they won 92. So Damian, do you think that this was a 10 win loss of an offseason?
I don't know if it was a 10-win loss of an offseason. I think there might be a little bit of like built-in regression already there on some other stuff around the fringes. But yeah, I think you still, I said it earlier and I'm going to say it again. I'm kind of done doubting the Guardians until they prove me wrong. Um they just always seem to kind of find a way. So I'm just going to pick the over here. I'm going to make them make me look stupid, which isn't hard, but I'm going to make them do it.
I think I'm going to take the under
Okay.
on this one because every other team in this division except the White Sox has gotten better. I think the Royals are probably maybe better, but the Tigers I think are definitely better, and I think the Twins because they'll be healthier hopefully are going to be better. So I am going to take the under on that. I agree there's some regression there. I think losing Andres Jimenez is going to be a pretty big loss. And I feel like this might be a little bit of a reset year for this Guardians team where you
Maybe.
have so many of these prospects and you're kind of getting them ready, getting some of them up, getting DeLauder up, maybe getting Bazana up, a couple of these pitchers we were talking about. And then in 2026, you kind of feel good about where you stand after if those guys have some success. So we'll see. This is definitely a team that could surprise again. Their odds to make the playoffs are plus 120, so a slight underdog to make the playoffs. Odds to win the American League Central plus 300. Um, and then their odds to win the World Series are plus 4,000. So, Damien, any final thoughts on the Guardians?
No, I mean, I think think we really hit it on the head here with what you should be looking out for. Look for their pitching to have some under the radar names. Look for their hitting to be carried by Stephen Kwan and Jose Ramirez, and see if their middle infield is able to have some sort of a breakout from it, because that's really where they're going to need some more production to come from. I think that really kind of sums up what this Guardians team is.
All right. Well, I guess that'll wrap it up for us. So don't forget, like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate the support, and we'll catch you on the next one.